Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit, the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes. Okay, now let's get on with the show. Hello everyone and welcome again to the Alternative Exit. Today we have a fantastic guest for you. Eric Sahan is the Business and Enterprise Lead at the Donut Economics Action Lab. Now don't worry, we're going to explain to you a little bit later on what that is. But I think what's exciting me about Eric is he's got a lot of experience in championing transformative ways to design business. Right? He's got a wealth of experience from a chief executive from sort of World Fair Trade Organization, working at Oxfam. He's been a lecturer at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability and Leadership. So all these have come together and given a really unique perspective on how we can be reshaping our business practices and how models like employee ownership can lead to a more equitable and sustainable future. So, Aaron, welcome to the Alternative Exit.
Thank you, Andy. Wonderful to be with a fellow Australian talking about ways to transform the business world.
It's great. I think you are the first other Australian I've interviewed on the podcast. So apologies to everyone if we do get a little bit faster in how we speak with each other. And hopefully we can continue to articulate our words because it's not my strong suit. So, Eric, we did in the introduction, we alluded to telling people a little bit more about sort of what the Donut Economics Action Lab. I think that'd be a great place to start to help people understand a little bit more about the work that you're doing there today.
So it starts with this concept of the donut, right? The donut, and I'm going to hold up a prop. I've got actually coffee in my prop for those that can see the video. It's a mug that is shaped as a donut. So imagine that donut shape and imagine the outer ring being a representation of this planet's boundaries, the planetary boundaries that Earth system scientists have told us we must not transgress. That's, climate change is one of them, but also ocean acidification, biodiversity loss, land conversion, ozone layer, etc. All of these 9 planetary ecological barriers that we must live within on this amazing planet of ours. The inside of the donut is the boundary that represents the social foundation. So we can't fall short on life's essentials. We need an economy that is neither overshooting the planet's boundaries nor falling short on life's essentials, and getting inside that donut becomes the goal of everything that we should be doing. Because currently we're in overshoot on planetary boundaries, and we are falling short on life's essentials for hundreds of millions of people stuck in poverty, growing inequality, etc. So that's the big picture. That's the macro vision. So how do we get into that? Well, donut economics emerged out of that. And my colleague, Kate Rayworth, who came up with the concept of the donut, wrote the book on donut economics, so ways to actually achieve transforming our economies and our businesses and our finances and our every other institution around us in order to get humanity into that donut. She's launched an amazing institution called the Donut Economics Action Lab, where we're helping loads of different people, thousands of people around the world who have taken these ideas of donut economics and started applying them in schools and education contexts, in city councils, in community organizations, in national governments, in research organizations, and the bit that I work on in the business world. And the implications on the business world are pretty profound when you start to say, look, the goal of this whole thing is for us to create businesses that are taking the actions, undergoing the transformations that are going to both live within the means of the planet and meet the needs of all. That ends up being the journey that I'm on with many hundreds of people around the world that are also interested in transforming the world of business.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And look, a bold and exciting mission in terms of what you're trying to achieve, and it's, as I said, it's something that's really, really critical. But I think one of the reasons why I'm really excited about having you here on the podcast today is, as we're sort of thinking about the listeners, and they're people who are trying to, these owners who are retiring, who own a lot of these SMBs, looking for what is the alternative that we've got to be able to exit the business. And with the focus that we've got is around sort of employee ownership. We're seeing in terms of business structures, like what we're going to be showing, or what sort of you're talking about today, like employee ownership is a pathway to be able to achieve both of those elements, helping people live within the means while also helping us to stop falling short on providing those life essentials for people. So I'd love to sort of talk about, how do you think about sort of different models for ownership and how they can be designed in support of those two goals of the donut economy mission?
Great question. So what we've been doing, and now I've worked with over 900 businesses the last 3.5 years in doing this work.
Okay.
And usually in a room of 20, 30, business leaders, CEOs, etc. Firstly, asking the question, where does your business have impact on people and on planet? Right. And really understanding how you're impacting, inequality, how you're impacting livelihoods, how you're impacting education on the social side, how you're impacting all those planetary boundaries, and how they're impacting you as a business, because you're also impacted by, insecurity in social and political systems, and you're impacted by poverty. That's not good for any business. You're impacted by the planetary ecological crises that await us. Once you do that, we then invite business leaders to really envision a future economy where their business and their industry is truly trying to get humanity into the donut. What are they doing differently? What are they starting to do? And what are they stopping doing? And there we start to have a conversation around, what does your business model even look like? What are you selling? How are you producing? How are you designing your products? Who are your clients if you're in services? How are you conceptualizing the way you're going to provide the kind of benefits that society needs? How are you doing business, essentially? And then you start putting big ideas on the table, like completely redesigning the products and going, well, maybe actually in 30 years' time, we're not going to be selling jeans, we're going to be renting out jeans, or I'm going to be selling phones that are modular by design, or really looking into the future and saying, I'm going to have deep partnerships with my cocoa and coffee farmers, because there's a huge insecurity of supplier. They're going to have to be intricately linked to my company. I'm going to have a very different supplier relationship where I'm paying up front. I'm doing a different kind of price negotiation, whatever it might be. And we're trying to put these really big ideas on the table, the transformation of the industry and the business itself, and envision that future economy, that future state. And then we step into what we call enterprise design. This is where the employee ownership world really is a huge part of what we're talking about. And here we start to ask the question, when we look at your ownership model and your governance structure, when we look at the purpose of your business and your networks of relationships, when we look at the financial structure behind the business, how is it holding back some of these sorts of transformative ideas? And how is it enabling those ideas? And how can we then evolve the design of your business? Oftentimes that gets to a conversation around redesigning ownership, about asking, what are the parameters and expectations of owners? How are they taking a long-term position? How are they allowing a broader governance to emerge, such as employees? How are they putting, for instance, nature on the board, as some companies have done through the organization Lawyers for Nature? How are they employing other ideas like steward ownership, or putting in mission locks or guardian shares that are locking in a long-term purpose-led perspective in the company? And of course, for so many businesses, especially those that rely so critically on the skills and the wisdom of their employees and the commitment of their employees, and have a huge impact on those employees and their communities, how are you bringing employees into your ownership mix and your governance design to allow you to be fit for the future, to allow your business to pursue the kind of ideas and business models that you yourself have identified earlier on? So we end up starting with this very macro donut picture, asking about, how are you impacting humanity? How are you impacting society and the living planet? And then moving into challenging people to ask the biggest ideas, ask them to put the biggest ideas on the table for transforming themselves and their businesses, ending up at a very micro and structural conversation around how are you willing to redesign your business in order to unlock those very ideas.
I love sort of hearing you talk a little bit more around sort of the governance, like how do we bring forward these ideas, like and generating also really large game changing ideas, which impact both parts of the donut. I think part that really resonates for me as you're thinking about sort of the change to an employee owned model is the fact that we're broadening the surface area of of innovation really within a business when there are more people who are sitting in that ownership seat. When I speak to retiring owners today, like there's this, a lot of them don't, they know that there's challenges. Like they know that there's these broader macro sort of environmental and economic trends, but a lot of them just don't have the energy to go and tackle it, or they're so set in their ways. But the great ones know that they want to look after the people in their community. They want to look after the people that helped them get to there, like their employees. The really great benefit is that we're not, when we're sort of helping companies going through these sort of transitions, and there's huge amounts of people who need to make this transition, like with the retiring baby boomers, like there's this big opportunity to change this ownership for a large portion of companies today. Once they do that, it really does unlock both sides of that donut. These employees, once they're sitting there and they're empowered to be owners, they're not only is it going to sort of increase the potential outcomes for them, but also they're going to start thinking more about how to behave better for the environment within the means within the planet. As I was sort of just talking about that element, you just got me excited about it. I hadn't thought about how to form that into an actual question, but I think it's more as we do start thinking about putting that into a question. I mean, what are some really great ways, and you've been working with these 900 companies, that they turn that desire for employee engagement and sort of desire to sort of potentially change governance to bring that innovation to the fore? Like, how have they done that successfully?
I mean, what I've found, Andy, is that there are no two companies that have ended up at the same design, same enterprise design. Yeah. And the ones that have done it successfully have often allowed themselves to sort of geek out a bit and really sort of engage with the process of enterprise design, demystified it a little bit. You know, who sits on your board? Well, we can design that. You know, how are employees engaged, and how are different stakeholders and interests represented, and how are trade-offs navigated, and how do difficult decisions over, for instance, reinvestment into the business versus paying dividends or profit shares, how are they navigated? These are the kind of ideas that, by having an open conversation, by engaging deeply, and by seeing into the future a little bit and predicting some scenarios that might emerge, people start to have very forthright conversations and start to unpack some plans, unpack some models that could work really well. I mean, of course, there are lots of off-the-shelf models. I've seen you've done, episodes on employee ownership trusts, for instance. There are other crossover models with employee ownership, like steward ownership, for instance, which often has a lot of it is a version of employee ownership. Sometimes it's slightly different, but there you're getting into different sorts of share classes that have dividend rights versus voting rights, for instance. But all of these are up for design. So the best businesses and business leaders I've seen are allowing themselves to, maybe at the beginning of opening up this conversation, feel a sense of overwhelm because it feels like a new one. It feels like, we just go with the standard thing, private companies, limited liability, whatever it, there's a standard thing. My accountant knows about it. My lawyer knows about it. I'm down that, but then it takes a little bit of courage to kind of go, I'm going to step out of that comfort zone. I'm going to feel a little bit overwhelmed for a minute, but I'm going to sit with the discomfort of that and come out the other end and be a bit excited about the level of agency I can now have over these design choices around particularly ownership design and governance design, and then be deliberate about how they're going to be shaped to enable the kind of future I want this company to have. So to me, that the individual's perspective who are shaping that journey is absolutely pivotal.
They do need a lot of excitement. They do need a lot of energy because, as you said, the people around them, their accountants, their lawyers, this is new for them. They don't know these things. And so they really need to be pushing people to be able to go make those changes. So just curious, I mean, is a big part of the work that you're doing to, I guess, educating the broader set of intermediaries as well as just the businesses about, hey, what's required for us to sort of to live within the means?
Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of it, educating is probably a bit heavy to describe what we do. I think we're thought partners. We try to support and foster people to show leadership in their own space. So we've got, a large number of consultants, business networks, incubators that are using these tools that I've created on looking at enterprise design, revisiting enterprise design. But we've also, through them, learn just the diversity of context, because it does sometimes depend on your jurisdiction and the laws. Yeah. And, people in the employee ownership world, of course, know very well the differences in, tax treatment of capital gains and the different legal structures that are possible in common law jurisdictions where you've got things like trusts, and in more civil law countries like the one you're sitting in, where maybe you'd use a foundation or some other structure. It's really diverse. So there isn't sort of a nice off the shelf, plug and play model that allows you to ignore any of the details. I think a lot of it's about drawing people in and saying, this stuff is a choice. Like, the mainstream models that dominate the business ownership and governance structures in our economies, they were invented just like everything else. These are human inventions, and we've just sort of stuck with certain things, and there's been a momentum that's emerged. But you don't go into the local forest and see, a limited liability, privately owned company walking around. Like, that was created by people who designed this thing to make certain decisions, shape, economic features of a business. And as business owners and employees and other stakeholders, like, it's something you can get involved in as well, and just be choiceful about how you're shaping the design of the business.
Okay. So if you think about, what role do you see as, when you talked about this sort of myriad of different models, what role do the models play in creating businesses that prioritize both the social and ecological goals of the donor?
Well, I mean, I think critically that there's a number of ones. One is like products and services. How the products and services a company is providing able to help humanity into the donut. And some of them need a pretty transformative change. If you're in fast fashion today, you're probably needing to look hard at how that model is going to transform away from fast fashion and towards much more slow, ethical clothing. It might not even be fashion where we end up with what the products are. If you're in electronics, we're talking, of course, about modular design. That is, those rare materials that are used, like, what a waste that they get thrown out, and so much of it never gets reused and repurposed. If you're in the building industry, again, we need to repurpose a lot of the concretes that's already been laid. We need to find ways to take advantage of materials. So ecologically, I mean, agriculture, there's so much to say about, the transformations needed that are hurting the soil, hurting the long-term productivity of agricultural land, and of course, putting at risk our own food security. Energy is the very obvious one. We need to move towards much more renewable and ecologically sustainable production of energy and away from fossil fuels. So all of the ecological factors are yelling at us and holding up a mirror and saying, look, you're putting out of balance this delicate life-supporting system that this, wet blue spinning rock we all call home relies on to allow us to live and thrive as humans. Like, this is a threat. Like, if we go out of whack and out of balance across those planetary boundaries, we're not going to have conditions conducive to life. We're going to put at threat a lot of the prosperity and thriving economies that we're having to create. And critically, I mean, there are no profits on a dead planet either. So there is a mirror that I think the donut helps hold up to businesses, and the social side is just as compelling. Because social inequality leads to instability, it leads to higher costs, it leads to, huge uncertainty into the future. It leads to economic and political risks. It undermines the very fabric of institutions that businesses rely on for stable economic conditions. So both of them are throwing a mirror back at businesses and saying, how are you going to transform yourself and your industry to belong in the kind of economy we're now having to create to help humanity live in the donut?
So thinking about if you think about sort of ownership structures, like there we sort of talked a little bit more about responsibility around products and services, like how can they think and act more effectively. But if you think about there's obviously a trend in a whole bunch of industries of everything coalescing and consolidating into a smaller number of faceless economic buyers of these businesses. You think about sort of, again, our target audience is they're contemplating, hey, look, do we exit, say, to private equity or who may be like an ocean away, or do we exit towards a competitor who may be like a country away, or do we potentially exit towards sort of locally and people in the community? Like how important is local ownership in terms of people making those better decisions for sort of ecology and community?
I'm so glad you raised that in that way, Andy, because I mean, for a long time, I've been thinking about what distinguishes the businesses that I've seen that seem to be making choices and looking at decisions in a way that is good for their local community, is recognizing the dependence, the codependence sometimes that's created between communities and workers and the business itself from those that are failing to do that. And maybe the most significant factor I've found is that those in charge aren't at the coalface. They're not, on a Friday, like I'm a Muslim originally from Turkey, and on a Friday going to mosque with their workers and seeing the impacts the business has, or on a Sunday going to church, to see, look people in the eye who have been affected by the decisions of the business. There's some, I worked at Procter & Gamble early in my career, and a lot of big decisions were made out of Cincinnati that were affecting markets around the world, supply communities around the world. And there's no way that a spreadsheet's ever going to capture the humanity that's impacted and the local resources impacted. So I think control and governance models that are bringing in those that are involved in the business, and it's not like a perfect science. It's a bit of an art. You've explored as well in your time in this space, Andy, the very diverse models of governance that can emerge in employee ownership structures. And I welcome that. I think, there are different levels of economic democracy and representation that are appropriate given like the time commitments and the speed of decisions needed and the commercial realities. And, there's so many, and with the willingness of employees to give time and headspace to certain things. So there's a real diversity, and you need to pick ones and also allow them to evolve over time, not just get stuck and experiment a little bit. But whatever it is, if there is engagement, especially through your employees who are part of the local community, who are seeing directly both the impacts of the business on them and the community, as well as seeing the business maybe from a more future-oriented perspective, because they're privy to a range of things that the C-suite won't be privy to. If you can bring those in, it's just all it is enriching. There's no technical experts going to sit at the top of this thing like a 19th century aristocrat to make beneficial decisions that are good for everybody. You're better off, you're richer for it if you can bring those employees into the mix, just for the wisdom and the insights, let alone the partnership and the sense of ownership that makes them more committed to the business as well, and to be committed to its success.
For me, it just makes sense to bring these people in. Like it's like you talked about the aristocrat who's like standing on top of the pile and directing traffic. But that's how we see so many people leading today. What are they not seeing? Like why are they making the changes?
I guess it's part of it. It's a fear that, what if they get it wrong? I'm better off staying in control because they might get it wrong. And to them, I would say it's not binary. It's not like you give up all control or you retain 100% control. again, I think in a previous episode, you mentioned, there was a discussion about how, even through the exit process, the previous owner can stay involved. And I think that your guest used the term keep a hand on the steering wheel as well. Like you can there are a whole different, this diversity is a whole spectrum of ways that you could incorporate. And then that could evolve over time as you give up more and more to the employees over time, for instance, and bring in the right ones and experiment with models and approaches. But I think there is a fear that, if I give up control, what if on a whim there are big mistakes made? And you've got to respect that perspective too, and tailor and design the process to address some of those concerns. But the answer can't be there could be shortcomings, so let's not do it at all. The answer must be there could be shortcomings. Let's be mindful of those and test and experiment and let the journey evolve so we minimize and mitigate some of the risks and we maximize the benefits that emerge from that process.
Yeah, I love, I guess, more pragmatic approach, and just sort of hope that more people start to adopt that. I mean, they start teaching more about that in management programs. It's like people go through an MBA and look at it's what comes. They're parts of that is mentioned in their courses, like how to be a better leader, more inclusive, engaged leader. That happens, but they come out and everyone's really focused on I can control a spreadsheet. And to control the spreadsheet, the best way is me barking to get that or a demand, rather than, hey, look, getting the voice of the customer, getting the voice of the employees, the workers to open up those opportunities to create better, more inclusive models. I did have sort of a question, like following off the back of that. I mean, you're obviously talking a lot about sort of people's fear of change. I mean, you've had a lot of experience across NGOs, social enterprises, large corporate to P&G. I mean, what do you see as like the biggest challenges for businesses when they want to transition to these sort of more responsible models?
Yeah, I mean, I've found some really surprising challenges, such as the interests and experiences of professional services. Just put a really practical one on the table, that I've met business leaders who've said, I've talked to my accountant or my lawyer about, transition planning and about possibilities of employee ownership or steward ownership, and they didn't seem to know anything about it, and they tried to dissuade me from doing it. I wouldn't underestimate like the credibility that sometimes like long-standing professional service partners can hold over the decisions of the business itself. So that one surprised me. I've discovered that like a high number of times that's the case. I've also discovered that sometimes the owner is keen, but the employees don't even realize it's an option. That and they kind of look at the employees and go, well, I'm not hearing the enthusiasm, because they're like, well, I haven't really been a part of this, or I don't know. And there's like a little bit of a you go first kind of standoff that emerges that makes it hard to go, well, is this going to be top down or bottom up? How's this going to, emerge? And I think there is a necessary discomfort to overcome there as people warm to an idea. Most people have never been a part of an employee ownership transition. So of course they're going to approach it with a level of uncertainty and not know like, ooh, what does this exactly mean for me? So there's a journey of awareness raising and education and having some of those conversations. And the last one I think is there isn't a culture of talking about money sometimes, ironically, in business. Like we talk about sales and revenue, but when we start talking about valuations and dividends and reinvestment, it's been traditionally quite an elite group that has done that. And the sustainability world that I've been in for the last couple of decades, I mean, that doesn't touch money. That's where the big boys play, the C-suites and beyond, and the investment bankers. And so I think we need to just talk about money. We need to talk about like who gets paid when. We need to talk about future profits and trade-offs and tensions and how those come, and sometimes there's a fear that a transition in ownership design, even the process of having the conversation, is going to bring up these uncomfortable money conversations. And I think there's something to be done culturally to climatize ourselves to that.
You highlight something that I hear a lot from owners when I'm speaking to them, is that they my employees just won't understand it. Like they don't want to understand it, which I always push back against. Like these are people they're managing their own mortgages. They're managing their own loans with their car repayments. They're managing their own finances, balancing a budget on a weekly, monthly level personally. Like they're capable. But again, so I go back to the sort of your earlier point is, look, there's a lot of fear, I say, of people providing that. Have you ever read the book, like the Great Game of Business by Jack Stack?
I haven't actually. I'll put that on my list.
It just super simplifies the conversation around money and sort of how people within a business context and like how really just boils down a business to a single metric that people say that people can go, hey, look, this is how I contribute to the metric. This is how I contribute to the business. And so he's been not so much the sort of a godfather, but he's been a leading voice in how to really drive more open book management practices within businesses and how that can really unlock further performance, engagement, and equity and purpose for people when they come to work. So yeah, it's a super simple approach to that. So mate, as we're coming to time, it's been a great conversation so far, but I'd like to sort of bring it back to sort of employee ownership a little bit and just ask you a quick, fast round of questions. So I'm just going to ask you 3 questions and you just offer a quick response. How does that sound?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So who would be a leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
Probably Julian Richer, I thought, did a fantastic job in transitioning, but also in championing the model.
Okay, fantastic. A favorite resource on employee ownership?
Favorite resource? Well, Transform Finance has got a fantastic resource on alternate ownership enterprises, and they've got a report on financing opportunities to support alternative ownership enterprises, mostly employee ownership models. So if you haven't already, check out Transform Finance Alternative Ownership Learning Hub.
I love that. I'll be linking that in the show notes as well. And then lastly, what would you say to a business owner who's sitting on a fence regarding a transition to an employee ownership model?
I'd say talk to people who have engaged with this before. Look for peers, look for employee ownership community groups or networks in your country, and begin the process not as a fait accompli. When you begin to talk to your employees, maybe just start to involve some of them in decision making. Let them experience a deeper engagement in the business before the conversation immediately jumps to, should this become an employee owned business? So warm things up a little bit and give people a sense of engagement and experience in the kind of things that they'll be involved in longer term.
Absolutely love it. That's awesome. Aaron, thank you so much for your time. Where can people follow your journey and learn more about the Donut?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm quite active on LinkedIn. They can find me there. But Donut Economics Action Lab has got a website, donuteconomics.org. If you go to donuteconomics.org, and it's spelled in the British way, DOUGH. NUT, donuteconomics.org, you can go to the themes heading, and there's a business and enterprise page, and I've put everything there that people can use. It's all free. There's a whole set of resources, and there's a map at the bottom of trained practitioners that are using Donut Economics tools with companies that they can get in touch with for support. Okay.
Look, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. And also for broadening the discussion that we've been having around sort of employee ownership. You're really sort of bringing, a much sort of a broader macro level view. And sort of, I think it's sort of shining a light on the broader opportunity and the broader potential impact that employee ownership might have. So thank you so much for your time and also for your leadership.
Thank you, Andy. Take care.
Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.